The mind is built to protect what is known. From the very beginning, it learns to recognize patterns, routines, and familiar outcomes because familiarity feels safe. When something is familiar, the mind relaxes. When something is unfamiliar, the mind becomes alert. This alertness is often mistaken for wisdom, but it is simply survival conditioning. The mind does not ask whether familiarity helps you grow. It only checks whether it keeps you comfortable. Over time, this comfort becomes a cage you don't realize you are living inside. Every habit you repeat strengthens the mind's preference for the familiar. The same thoughts, the same reactions, the same emotional responses are rehearsed daily until they feel like truth. The mind then defends these patterns, not because they are right, but because they are known. Even pain becomes acceptable if it is predictable. This is why people stay in situations that no longer serve them. The mind would rather choose a known struggle than face an unknown possibility. When growth appears, it often arrives disguised as uncertainty. New opportunities rarely feel safe at first. They feel awkward, unstable, and unclear. The mind reacts by pulling you back toward what you already understand. It reminds you of past failures, risks, and imagined consequences. This reaction happens automatically, without your permission. If you are not aware, you obey it and call it being realistic. In truth, it is the mind choosing familiarity over expansion. Familiarity gives the illusion of control. When you know the routine, you believe you can manage the outcome. Growth removes that illusion. It requires stepping into situations where you cannot predict every result. The mind resists this loss of control because control feels like security. But control is not the same as freedom. Many people are controlled by their need to feel in control, repeating the same cycles year after year while calling it stability. The mind also ties familiarity to identity. You begin to believe that what you have always done is who you are. The thought of changing behavior feels like betraying yourself. The mind says, "This is just how I am," not realizing that this sentence is a wall, not a truth. Growth threatens identity, and the mind defends identity aggressively because it fears emptiness without labels. Even success can become a limitation when it turns into familiarity. Once something works, the mind clings to it. It resists evolution, innovation, and deeper challenges. Comfort zones expand only when they are challenged, yet the mind wants to settle permanently. What once was progress slowly becomes stagnation, but the mind continues to protect it because it recognizes it. This is why awareness is so important. Without awareness, the mind decides your limits for you. With awareness, you can see the difference between genuine danger and simple discomfort. Most opportunities for growth are blocked not by real threats, but by the mind's habit of choosing what feels known over what could be possible. When you start observing the mind, you notice how quickly it rejects the unfamiliar. A new idea appears, and immediately there is doubt. A new direction calls you, and instantly the mind lists reasons to stay where you are. These reactions are not commands, they are signals. When you see them clearly, you gain space between the thought and the action. Growth begins the moment you stop letting familiarity decide your future. You don't need to destroy the mind or silence it completely. You only need to stop obeying it blindly. When you move forward despite discomfort, the mind slowly learns that unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. What once felt threatening becomes normal, and a new level of familiarity is formed. Each time you step beyond what is known, you expand the boundaries of what feels safe. The mind adapts, but only after you act. Possibility does not open through thinking alone. It opens through conscious movement into the unknown, where the mind follows later, reshaping its sense of safety around your courage. Memory is one of the strongest forces shaping the mind. It collects experiences, stores emotions, and builds conclusions about how life works. The problem begins when memory is mistaken for reality. The mind uses past events as a reference point for the present, filtering every new moment through what has already happened. Instead of meeting life fresh, you meet it through old images, old pain, and old conclusions. When something once failed, memory records the feeling of disappointment more strongly than the facts. The mind then recalls that feeling whenever a similar situation appears. It does not say, "This is new." It says, "I know this." In that moment, the present is erased. You are no longer responding to what is happening now, but to what happened before. Possibility fades because the mind assumes the outcome before action even begins. MER is useful for learning skills, but dangerous when it defines limits. A child touches fire and learns not to repeat the action. This is intelligent memory. But when the mind uses emotional memory the same way, it creates unnecessary restrictions. One rejection becomes proof that you are not capable. One mistake becomes evidence that you should not try again. The mind turns isolated moments into permanent rules. The past does not have power on its own. It only has power when it is continuously recalled. Each time you replay a memory, you strengthen it. The emotional charge returns, even if the situation is no longer present. The body reacts as if the past is happening again. Tension, fear, hesitation all arise from something that no longer exists. Yet the mind treats it as current truth because of memory. The mind prefers what it already understands. Even if something new could lead to growth, the mind compares it to old experiences and decides it is unsafe. This comparison is unfair because the present moment is never identical to the past. People change. Conditions change. You change. But memory does not update itself unless you consciously challenge it. Many people say they want change, but their memory keeps pulling them backward. They imagine a new path, then immediately remember why they stopped last time. The mind says, "You already tried." It does not say, "You tried as a different person, at a different time, with different awareness." By trusting memory too much, you deny your own evolution. Mirror also feeds emotional identity. You begin to see yourself through what you have been through. Pain becomes a reference point for self-definition. The mind says, "Because this happened to me, this is who I am." In this way, memory becomes a story you live inside, rather than an experience you have moved beyond. Awareness creates distance between memory and reality. When you observe a thought rooted in the past, you can recognize its origin. You see that it is a replay, not a prediction. This recognition weakens its control. The thought may still appear, but it no longer decides your action automatically. Living in the present requires courage because it removes the shield of memory. You step into moments without guarantees, without emotional armor. The mind resists this because memory feels like preparation. But true responsiveness comes only when you are fully present, not when you are rehearsing old outcomes. Each moment is offering something new, but the mind can only see it if memory loosens its grip. When you stop using yesterday to define today, attention sharpens. You notice opportunities that were invisible before. The weight of past failures begins to dissolve, not because they never happened, but because they are no longer allowed to control what happens next. The present moment is simple, but the mind makes it heavy by dragging the past into it. When memory steps back, life feels lighter, more open, more fluid. Action becomes natural instead of forced. Possibility returns the moment you stop asking the past for permission to move forward. The mind creates identity as a way to organize life. It gathers traits, roles, habits, and experiences and forms a clear image of who you are supposed to be. This image feels solid, reliable, and familiar. Once identity is established, the mind works constantly to protect it. Anything that challenges this image feels uncomfortable, not because it is wrong, but because it threatens the structure the mind depends on. Identity begins as something flexible, but over time it hardens. You repeat certain behaviors, and the mind labels them as me. You avoid certain actions, and the mind labels them as not me. These labels slowly turn into boundaries. What was once a description becomes a limitation. The mind forgets that identity was learned, not discovered. When change appears, the mind experiences it as danger. Growth requires stepping into behaviors you have not practiced, expressions you have not claimed, and paths you have not walked. The mind resists because these actions do not fit the established self-image. It says, "This is not who you are," as if identity were a law instead of a habit. In reality, identity is only a memory of repeated choices. Vaxtic identity blocks learning. If you believe you are bad at something, you stop engaging with it fully. If you believe you are a certain type of person, you unconsciously filter opportunities that contradict that belief. The mind protects consistency more than truth. It would rather be consistent than correct, because consistency maintains psychological comfort. Identity also creates fear of judgment. When you are attached to who you think you are, you become sensitive to how others see you. Any action outside your usual role feels risky because it might invite criticism. The mind imagines loss of respect, rejection, or confusion from others. To avoid this discomfort, it keeps you inside familiar roles, even if those roles feel limiting or empty. Success and failure both reinforce fixed identity. Success makes the mind cling to a particular image, afraid that change could destroy it. Failure convinces the mind that stepping outside the identity is dangerous. In both cases, movement stops. Growth requires flexibility, but identity prefers stability. The deeper problem is that identity gives a false sense of certainty. The mind feels safe when it can say, "I know who I am." But this certainty comes at the cost of possibility. Life is not static. You are not meant to remain the same version of yourself forever. When identity becomes rigid, it blocks natural evolution. Awareness reveals that identity is a construction. When you observe your thoughts, you notice how often they reference who you think you are. You hear phrases like, "I am not the kind of person who," or "I have always been." These thoughts are not facts. They are mental habits. Seeing this clearly loosens their hold. When identity softens, behavior becomes more fluid. You allow yourself to experiment without attaching success or failure to your sense of self. Actions become expressions, not definitions. This freedom creates space for learning, creativity, and growth. Letting go of fixed identity does not mean losing yourself. It means discovering that you are not limited to one form. You are capable of responding differently in different moments. The mind fears this openness because it cannot predict it, but life thrives in unpredictability. The moment you stop defending an image of who you are, energy that was used for protection becomes available for exploration. Curiosity replaces fear. Presence replaces self-consciousness. Instead of asking whether something fits your identity, you ask whether it brings clarity, vitality, or truth. A flexible identity allows you to meet each situation fresh, without carrying a rigid self-image into it. You respond based on awareness rather than habit. In this state, growth feels natural, not forced. Possibilities that were once blocked by labels begin to appear. Not because the world changed, but because the boundaries in the mind relaxed. Fear rarely presents itself openly. If it did, most people would recognize it and question it. Instead, fear hides behind logic, planning, and reason. The mind dresses fear in intelligent language so it sounds responsible and mature. It says you should wait, analyze more, prepare longer, or choose a safer path. These thoughts feel sensible, so they are rarely challenged. In this way, fear controls behavior without ever being named. The mind is skilled at predicting negative outcomes. It scans the future and imagines loss, embarrassment, failure, and rejection. It then uses these imagined scenarios as evidence. Because the mind can explain them clearly, they appear logical. But prediction is not reality. Most of these outcomes never happen, yet the body reacts as if they are certain. Tension forms, hesitation grows, and action is delayed. Fear's primary goal is avoidance. It does not care about fulfillment or growth. It only wants to prevent discomfort. Logic becomes its strongest ally. The mind asks, "What is the worst that could happen?" and then builds a convincing case around that question. It ignores potential gains and focuses only on possible pain. This selective reasoning feels like wisdom, but it is incomplete. One of the clearest signs of fear disguised as logic is excessive waiting. You feel a pull toward something new, but the mind insists that the timing is wrong. It says you need more information, more confidence, more resources. The requirements keep increasing, and the starting point keeps moving further away. Preparation becomes a hiding place. Action is postponed indefinitely, while the mind claims it is being careful. Fear also hides behind responsibility. The mind tells you that others depend on you, that taking risks would be selfish. While responsibility is real, fear exaggerates it. It convinces you that staying where you are is the only mature choice. Growth is framed as recklessness, even when it aligns with your deeper values. This creates inner conflict. Where desire is suppressed in the name of being sensible, the problem is not thinking ahead. The problem is believing every thought that warns you. When fear speaks through logic, it creates certainty where none exists. The mind presents assumptions as facts. It rarely asks, "What if this works?" Because that question feels dangerous. Hope feels risky to a fearful mind because hope invites movement. Awareness changes the relationship with fear. When you notice how often logic is used to justify inaction, you begin to see the pattern. The thought may still appear, but you recognize its tone. You see that it is rooted in avoidance, not clarity. This recognition weakens its authority. Acting does not require the absence of fear. It requires honesty about fear. When you admit that a reason is actually fear-based, you regain choice. You can decide whether the discomfort of action is worth the possibility it holds. Fear loses power when it is named. Small actions are especially important. Fear grows when action feels overwhelming. The mind imagines the entire journey and becomes paralyzed. When you focus on a single step, logic has less room to argue. Movement begins, and fear adjusts to the new reality. The mind learns from experience, not from debate. Each time you act despite fear, the mind updates its assumptions. What once seemed dangerous becomes manageable. The logic that once stopped you slowly dissolves, because it is no longer supported by evidence. Fear will continue to appear, but it no longer needs to decide your direction. Logic can be used as a tool instead of a shield. When reasoning supports movement rather than avoidance, it becomes wisdom. In this balance, action and awareness work together, allowing growth without reckless force and courage without denial. Awareness is the point where automatic patterns begin to weaken. Most mental blocks continue only because they are unseen. The mind repeats thoughts, emotions, and reactions in the same way the body repeats habits. When there is no awareness, these patterns feel like reality itself. You believe you are choosing, but you are only reacting. Awareness interrupts this cycle by allowing you to witness what is happening without immediately becoming it. The mind operates on momentum. A thought appears, an emotion follows, and behavior happens almost instantly. This speed creates the illusion that everything is fixed. Awareness slows the process down. The moment you notice a thought as a thought, space appears. In that space, the thought no longer has complete control. It may still be present, but it is no longer invisible. Many people try to change their thoughts by force. They fight the mind, suppress emotions, or replace one idea with another. This often strengthens the pattern because resistance feeds attention. Awareness works differently. It does not argue or attack. It simply observes. Observation removes identification. When you are no longer identified with the thought, its grip weakens naturally. Awareness also exposes repetition. You begin to see how often the same worries arise, how the same fears return in different situations, how the same self-judgments repeat. These patterns once felt personal and meaningful. With awareness, they start to look mechanical. This realization is powerful. It shows you that many of your limits are not truths, but habits. When awareness is present, reaction becomes choice. Instead of immediately following a familiar response, you pause. In that pause, you can choose differently. This does not mean the choice is always easy. Discomfort may still be there. Fear may still speak. But awareness gives you the ability to act without being completely controlled by them. Mental patterns survive through unconscious reinforcement. Each time you react the same way, the pattern strengthens. Each time you observe without reacting, the pattern weakens. This is how awareness reshapes the mind. Not through force, but through non-participation in automatic behavior. Awareness also reconnects you with the present moment. Many blocks exist because attention is trapped in the past or projected into the future. When you become aware of your breath, your posture, your immediate surroundings, the mind quiets. In this quietness, problems that once felt overwhelming lose intensity. Possibilities become easier to perceive because attention is no longer scattered. As awareness deepens, emotional reactions change. Instead of being overwhelmed by anger, fear, or doubt, you feel them as temporary sensations. They arise, peak, and pass. This changes your relationship with emotion. You no longer make life decisions from emotional storms. You wait until clarity returns. Awareness also dissolves false urgency. The mind often creates pressure, telling you that you must react now, or you will lose something. When you are aware, you see this urgency as a mental signal, not a command. You respond with calm attention instead of panic. Calm attention opens space for better decisions. With consistent awareness, the mind becomes more flexible. Thoughts come and go without defining you. You are no longer locked into one perspective. This flexibility allows creativity to emerge. New ideas feel accessible because the mind is not defending old patterns as aggressively. Awareness is not passive. It is an active presence. It requires honesty, patience, and willingness to feel discomfort without escaping it. Over time, this presence becomes natural. You begin to live less from habit and more from clarity. As mental patterns loosen, life feels less heavy. You respond instead of react. You see options instead of obstacles. Possibilities that were blocked by unconscious behavior begin to appear, not because you forced change, but because awareness quietly removed the barriers that were never solid to begin with. The mind was never meant to define the limits of your life, only to serve it. When it is left unquestioned, it clings to familiarity, repeats the past through memory, hardens identity, disguises fear as logic, and keeps old patterns alive through unconscious reaction. These mechanisms feel natural, even intelligent, which is why they quietly block new possibilities without resistance. The moment awareness enters, everything begins to shift. You start seeing how often your thoughts are echoes, not instructions. You recognize that discomfort is not danger, and uncertainty is not failure. What once felt like a wall is revealed to be a habit of thinking. The mind loosens when it is observed, and in that loosening, space appears. In that space, you are no longer driven by who you were, what happened before, or what might go wrong. You act from clarity instead of fear, from presence instead of memory. Possibility does not require creating a new life. It requires seeing life without the filters that once narrowed it. When familiarity no longer decides, memory no longer controls, identity no longer confines, fear no longer disguises itself as wisdom, and awareness replaces reaction, the mind stops blocking the path forward. What remains is a quiet readiness to meet each moment as it is, open, responsive, and alive.